Hi friends, we have already seen two videos on corporate communication. The previous video was on the key concepts in corporate communication, that is corporate identity, corporate image and corporate reputation. In this video, we are going to learn about the ethics and laws in corporate communication, wherein we'll be covering the importance of ethics and corporate communication and professional code of ethics, and mass media laws relating to defamation, invasion of privacy, Copyright Act, digital privacy, and the Right to Information Act. Let us see what we mean by ethics. Now, the term ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which refers to the character. According to the Webster Dictionary, ethical means conforming to professional standards of conduct. The term ethic refers to the code of conduct that guides an individual while dealing with others. It relates to social rules and cardinal values that motivate people to be honest in dealing with others. In short, we can say to be ethical is to be common, to be honest in your dealing. And when we say ethics in business, it indicates doing your business in an honest and sincere way. Let us now look into what is the importance of ethics in corporate communication. Now, ethics corresponds to the basic human needs. If you find it is a human trait that the man desires to be ethical, not only in his private life but also in his business affairs. Moreover, most of the people want to be a part of the organization which they can be publicly be proud of and be respected, stating that I work for an organization which is honest and has ethical values. Second important point is values create credibility with the public. Now here what you find. Now if a company is perceived to be ethically and socially responsive, it will be honored and respected even by those who do not have intimate knowledge of its actual working. Since the people believe that company offers value for money, there will be instinctive prejudice in favor of its products. Third one is values give credibility to the management. The organizational goals, when perceived by the employees as genuine, create common goals, values, and language. The management has credibility with its employees because of its credit it has with the public. The fourth one is values help better decision making. Now, ethical attitude helps management make better decisions. Why? That is, decisions that are in the interest of the public, their employees, and the company's long-term good, though the decision may be slower. Fifth point is ethics and profits. Both are interrelated. Both ethics and profits go together. A company which is inspired by ethical conduct is profitable one. Value-driven companies are sure to be successful in the long run. Next is efficient utilization of business resources. If you are ethical, because ethics is needed for the efficient utilization of business resources. If the management and the seniors of the organization follows ethical business practices, the same will be followed by other employees. The employees too will refrain from using office property resources for their personal benefits. Now this will result in better and efficient utilization of business resources. Seventh one, it helps to enhance productivity. The ethics in an organization helps to bring out superior employee performance in terms of productivity and establishing cordial relationship among the employees and the management. Ethics help build in models amongst the employees of a company, which in turn enhances the productivity. Eighth one is law cannot always protect society. We have to be honest. We have to be ethical. Technology develops faster. Government can regulate. People in an industry often know the dangers in a particular technology better than the regulatory agencies. Further, the government cannot always regulate all the activities which are harmful to the society. Where law fails, it is here that ethics succeed. An ethical oriented management takes measures to prevent pollution and protect the workers' health. Next we come up to corporate communication and professional code of ethics. Now the power to communicate with the corporations, employees and customers carries considerable responsibilities. Organizations including the International Association of Business Communications and Public Relations Society of America developed ethical standards essential for professional communicators. The content varies by the organization, but the principles are the same. What is the first principle of this corporate communication or the professional code of ethics? One is honesty. Professional communicators are honest, accurate, and candid in all the communications. Now, this practice encourages the free flow of important information in the interest of the public. Second one is confidentiality. Protecting the confidences and privacy rights of the employees and customers is the duty of professional communicators. Additionally, they must abide by the legal requirements for disclosing information that affects the welfare of others. Third one is credit. When content is borrowed from another source, remember, professional communicators give credit and identify that source. In many cases, communicators must request permission from the original source before sharing the borrowed information. Free speech. Professional communicators support the principle of free speech and free ideas. These practices encourage open competition. Fifth one, we come up to the courtesy. Sensitivity to cultural values and beliefs are crucial for professional communicators. Now, it's important to understand your audiences and encourage mutual understanding. So, we have seen the 5 principles of corporate communication in professional code of ethics: honesty, confidentiality, credit, free speech, and courtesy. Next we come up to mass media. Now let us understand what do you mean by mass media and what are the laws relating to mass media. Mass media means technology that is intended to reach a mass audience. It is the primary means of communication used to reach vast majority of the general public. The most common platform for mass communication media are the newspapers, the magazines, radio, television, and the internet. Now, what are the laws relating to this mass media? Here we are more concerned. What are the mass media laws? Now, mass media laws are nothing but the legal regulations of the mass media, which relates to culture, entertainment, advertising, broadcasting, telecommunications, and generally anything that relates to digital and analog media. Now, let us look into what are the regulations concerning this. First one, regulation concerning defamation. Now, what is a defamation? Defamation is a term that covers any statement that hurts someone's reputation. If the statement is made in writing and published, remember this, if you are going to make a statement in writing and publish it, that is a defamation. Now, this type of defamation, which is a written form and in a published form, is called as libel. Now, if that same statement is in the form of words which is spoken, it is called as slander. So, spoken words of defamation are slander, and written published words of defamation are called as libel. So, Written is libel, spoken is slander. Defamation is not a crime. Defamation is a civil wrong. The law of defamation varies from state to state. What does the victim need now? If you are a victim of defamation, then what you need to prove in order to establish that it is a defamation? Let's look into details of this. Now, the laws of defamation, as I said, it varies from state to state, but there are some generally accepted rules for defamation. If you believe you have been defamed and you want to prove it, you have to show that there is been a statement that is all of the following. First one, it should be a written statement. It should be libel. It should be published. It should be false. It should be injurious. And it should be unprivileged. So 5 things are necessary to prove that the statement which is written and published, which is libel, is a defamation. Written statement, published statement, false statement, injurious statement, and unprivileged statement. Now let us look into the elements in detail. First, the statement can be spoken, written, pictured, or even gestured. Because written statements last longer than spoken statement, most of the courts and juries and insurance companies consider libel more harmful than slander, and therefore written statements can be sued in the court of law. Second, it should be published, means that the third party heard it or saw the statement. That is, someone other than the person who made the statement or person the statement was about published does not necessarily mean that the statement was printed in a book. It just needs to have been made public through social media. It may be through television, it may be through radio, it may be through speeches, gossip, or even loud conversation. Of course, it could also have been written in magazines, in books, in newspapers, in leaflets, or in form of signs. Third one, a defamatory statement is a false statement. Otherwise, it's not considered damaging. It should be a false statement. Even terribly mean or disparaging things are not defamatory if the shoe fits. Most opinions don't count as defamation because they can't be proved to be objectively false. For instance, when a reviewer says that was the worst book I have read all year, she is not defaming the author because the statement can't be proven to be false. Now the statement should be injurious. Fourth, since the whole point of defamation law is to take care of injuries to reputation, those suing for defamation must show how their reputations were hurt by the false statement. For an example, the person lost work. He was shunned by the neighbors, friends, or family members, or was harassed by the press. Someone who already had a terrible reputation most likely won't collect much in a defamation suit. Finally, to qualify as a defamatory statement, the offending statement must be unprivileged. What does that mean? Under certain circumstances, you cannot sue someone for defamation even if they make a statement that can be proved false. For an example, witnesses who testify falsely in the court or at a disposition cannot be sued. Although witnesses who testify to something they know is false could theoretically be prosecuted for the perjury. Lawmakers have decided that in these and other situations which are considered privileged, free speech is so important that speakers should not be constrained by worries that they will be sued for defamation. So lawmakers themselves also enjoy this privilege. They aren't liable for the statement made in legislative chamber or in the official matters, even if they say or write things that could otherwise be defamatory. For example, a newspaper knowingly prints an article falsely asserting that a public figure has cheated on business partners in the past. This is an example of defamation. Now, can I sue someone for spreading lies about me? Am I talking about defamation? Now, if you meet the requirement of a civil action, you can sue someone for defamation, whether libel or slander, if they have written or said something bad about you. However, you must be able to prove the necessary elements of defamation suit if you wish to collect damages. Next, we come up to invasion of privacy. Now, invasion of privacy is the unjustifiable intrusion into personal life of another without consent. Without consent. If you are going to interfere into someone's life without consent, that is invasion of privacy. The four most common types of invasion of privacy are: number one, appropriation of name or likeness. Second, intrusion upon seclusion. Third, public disclosure of private facts. And fourth is false light claims. Let us look into each aspect of this invasion of privacy. Number one, appropriation of name or the likeness. Appropriation of a person's name or likeness for commercial or great purpose without any permission is invasion of privacy. Use of an individual's photograph, sketch of a person's nickname or other name is all considered use of a name or likeness. For an example, in 2005, an ad agency approached a famous musician, Tom Waits. They gave him an offer to do an ad campaign for a few automobiles company that had approached them. But Tom Waits declined the offer. What did the advertising agency do? The advertising agency then hired someone who dubbed the voice of Tom Waits, who sounded like him, to do the soundtrack. And this made Waits to sue the automaker for appropriating his likeness. This is a perfect case of invasion of privacy under appropriation of name or likeness. The second one is intrusion upon seclusion. Now, intruding someone's private affairs, physically or otherwise, is subject to liability if the other person finds it offensive and unacceptable. If you are going to try to interfere into my personal life, physically or otherwise, and if it is not being acceptable to me, it is an offense. And this offense comes under invasion of privacy. When someone illegally intercepting private phone calls or snooping someone's private records without permission, or takes someone's photographs. Nowadays you have got a lot of people having that mobile and taking photographs without permission, and on are examples of inclusion of right to privacy. You cannot click photographs if the person is not willing, or if the person is not giving you to take a photograph. That's intrusion upon seclusion. The third one is public disclosure of private facts. Now, this is about encroaching someone's personal territory. Public disclosure of private fact laws protect your right to keep the details of your private life from becoming public information. For example, in publishing facts about a person's health, sexual records, or financial trouble is likely an invasion of privacy. You cannot do it. It is his private property, his private territory. You cannot interfere into his private territory. You cannot you cannot encroach into someone's personal territory. That's invasion of privacy. And the fourth one is false light claim. Now, false light laws protect your right to not have potentially misleading or damaging information about yourself publicly disclosed. For an example, it may be an invasion of privacy if a caption published with a photograph in the news article about a protest describes a person as participant when in fact the person who was only observing the protest. Now this is false light claim. So we saw the 4 conditions where you are likely to come under invasion of privacy: appropriation of name or likeness, intrusion upon seclusion, public disclosure of private facts, and false claim. Thereafter, we come up to your next topic is what are copyright. Now, copyright is a bundle of rights given by the law to creators of literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works and producer of cinematography, films, and sound recording. Now, these are their original work. The right provided under the copyright law include the right of reproduction of the work, communication of the work to the public, or adaptation of the work, translation, or the translation of the work. Now, what does the Copyright Act states? The Copyright Act of 1957, which is amended in 2012, governs the subject of copyright law in India, and the law is applicable from 21st of January 1958. Now, you find that infringement of copyright or cause when somebody exercises copyright owner's right without permission, that's infringement. Now, if you say, are ideas copyright? No, ideas cannot be copyrighted. Then we come up to digital privacy. Now, digital privacy is a form of online piracy and includes the unauthorized online distribution of electronic copies of copyrighted material such as software, movies, and music. Now you often find before the film is released, you will see the film on your television. That is digital piracy. Recently, we have seen that many filmmakers have shown that concern towards the release of their movies on digital platform before the release date, and it gets leaked on digital platform, which impacts their business. This is digital piracy. And next, last one, we come up to the Right to Information Act. Right to Information is an act of the Parliament of India to provide for setting out to the practical regime of right to information for citizens and replaces the Freedom of Information Act 2002. Now, what does this act state? Now, this act covers whole of India except Jammu and Kashmir, and it's applicable to all constitutional authorities. Right to Information Act is an act of the Parliament of India. Now, the act, under the provisions of the act, any citizen of India, mind it, under the provisions of the act, any Indian citizen may request information from public authority which is required to reply within 30 days. The act also requires every public authority to computerize the records for the wide dissemination and to proactively make it into certain categories of information so that the citizens need minimum recourse to a request for information formally. So here we have covered up the first unit on corporate communication and public relations.